In this video, we'll talk about the mechanisms of microevolution. The gene pool of a population consists of all the alleles of all of the individuals in that population. Microevolution is defined as a generation-to-generation change in a population's frequencies of alleles. Or a change in their gene pool. When we look at the mechanisms that can drive these changes in a gene pool, there are 4 of them, and actually only one of them promotes adaptation. These 4 drivers of microevolution include genetic drift, gene flow, mutation, and natural selection. So all 4 of these can end up changing the gene pool of a population, but only natural selection moves a population towards adaptation or specialization to its environment. Genetic drift is a change in the gene pool of a small population due to chance. Genetic drift doesn't have to do with which traits are more advantageous or which traits cause an individual to be better suited to their environment. Instead, just chance events end up changing the genetic makeup of the population. And this has a much greater impact on small populations. So what is a chance event? Well, it could be that you have a population of flowers growing on a hillside, and suddenly a landslide occurs and half of the population is suddenly gone. The ones that survived didn't survive because they were any better adapted. It was just chance, luck of the draw, that they weren't there where that natural disaster occurred or where that population limiting event took place. Let's take as a hypothetical example this concept of a field of flowers. And initially in this field of flowers, there are 2 alleles. The capital R allele is for red flowers and is dominant, and the little r allele is for white flowers and is recessive. If we look in our initial population that is made up of 10 flowers and count up all the incidences of capital R and all the incidences of lowercase r, we find that capital R and lowercase r have ratios in such that capital R makes up 70% of the alleles in that gene pool, and lowercase r makes up 30%. But let's say there was a chance event. Something happened, something went through, and only a few individuals survived to produce offspring in that next generation. Those are the 5 individuals that are highlighted in that first box. And again, they were just selected by chance. Well, when we look at the offspring of those 5 individuals, we see that the ratio of capital R to lowercase r is very different in this second generation. We see instead of having a 70-30 ratio, we end up having a 50-50 ratio, where capital R is just as common as lowercase r within the population itself. Let's say there's another random event and most of the population is lost and only 2 individuals survive. But these 2 individuals both happen to be homozygous dominant. When we look at generation 3 at their offspring, we see that that lowercase r allele has totally been lost from the population. Again, it's not because white flowers was somehow bad. It was just chance events and a very small population that resulted in these drastic changes in the allele frequency from one generation to the next. This is genetic drift. Another example of genetic drift is something known as the bottleneck effect. In the bottleneck effect, as I had mentioned, it's an example of genetic drift. This is a situation where a population is suddenly drastically reduced. So you have a large population and suddenly only a handful of individuals survive. Bottlenecking in a population usually reduces the amount of genetic variation. This effect gets its name from this visual example. Assume that all the marbles in this bottle represent a population. And we can see that there are blue marbles and white marbles in about equal amounts, and then just a scattering of yellow marbles in that population. Something happens, most of this population is going to die. A handful of members will survive. So we'll say, okay, the first 6 marbles that are poured out of this bottle, that is our surviving population. And we see by chance, pouring out those first 6 marbles, 5 of them are blue, 1 of them is white, and none of them are yellow. If this surviving population is going to give rise to the next population, it will have a very different genetic makeup than that original population did. And we'll see it will be much less genetically diverse than that original population. Now, do we have evidence of this happening? And the answer is yes. In fact, if we look at the genetic makeup of the current cheetah population, it is far less genetically distinct than we would expect for its current size. This tells us that at some point in the past, cheetahs nearly went to extinction. In fact, there was just one surviving family group that was able to make the migration from North America, where they initially developed, into Africa, where they currently survive. The genetic similarity of the cheetahs is so significant. We know if a human has to get an organ transplant or skin transplant, we have to do a lot of genetic tests to make sure that the immune systems are not going to find that transplanted organ to be a foreign or hostile source. And even then, individuals have to take immune-reducing medication so that their body doesn't reject that transplanted organ. Well, they've done similar experiments using skin tags on cheetahs, and they've never found a case where a skin tag was rejected. The genetic diversity of the entire cheetah population is so similar that the individuals recognize each other's cells as their own cells. And so really that's just a sign of how little genetic variation there is within the cheetah population. Because of that, there is a lot of birth defects and low survival rate due to this high degree of inbreeding within that population. The next driver of microevolution is gene flow. In gene flow, this is genetic exchange with another population. Now, it's important to realize I'm not talking about genetic exchange with a different species, but simply between 2 populations of the same species that had been separate from each other. Gene flow is when separate populations start exchanging material, and this tends to reduce the genetic differences between these populations. In fact, there was an issue of Time magazine from many, many years ago talking about the new face of America, how immigrants are shaping the world's first multicultural society. Now, there's a lot of concern or fear-mongering about, like, oh no, are we going to lose things that make individuals different from each other? Are we all going to become one homogeneous genetic population? And we know that isn't the case, but we are seeing some of these distinctive combinations of traits or characteristics are being lost or changed. Combinations of traits are being found together that in their initial populations hadn't been present, hadn't been common. And so this is an example of gene flow. What had been separate human populations that gave rise to racial and genetic distinctions, we're now seeing combinations and mixtures of those traits together in new and interesting ways. The fourth driver of microevolution is mutation. So as we've said several times now, mutations are changes in an organism's DNA. A mutation in a single individual does not have much of an effect on a population's allele frequency. But if that individual passes that mutation to many offspring, and they in turn pass it on to their offspring, what had started as a single change, a single mutation, may end up becoming quite abundant within a population. Now, the final driver of microevolution, and as I had said, the only one that's actually driving adaptation or specialization to an environment, is natural selection. So of all of the causes of microevolution, only natural selection promotes adaptation. Darwinian fitness is the contribution an individual makes to the gene pool of the next generation relative to the contribution of other individuals. So if you've ever heard the term survival of the fittest, it's not necessarily saying the strongest, but it's saying the most reproductively fit, those that produce the most offspring. Their traits will survive into future generations. Now, sometimes it can be by competing for resources that those individuals are deemed as fit, but really this biological term fitness has to do with reproductive success. As the results of microevolution accumulate in a population, it may result in a speciation event. This is macroevolution. So how does microevolution give rise to new species? That's what we'll be talking about in our next video.